All right, here we go. Here we go. Web3 show, long form episode, week 2 of the Writers Guild of America strike in Hollywood. Lots to talk about today as it relates to Web3, AI, these new technologies, these macroeconomic forces. Travis Wright, Donald Lim. I can't wait for this one.
Hi, Chris. Hi, Travis.
Nice to see you guys. Donald from hanging out in the Philippines today. I am in Puerto Rico. Snook is over there in Arizona. And we got it going on today. We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. There is a lot of stuff, a lot of people freaking out about AI and how's it going to impact their job, including the Hollywood Writers Guild and some other creatives out there, which in my mind, they do have some reason to be concerned. I think that there's some interesting conversations that we're going to talk about this, Mr. Chris Snook, today.
Yes, for sure. Donald, I don't know if you've been seeing it in your news cycle over there in Southeast Asia, but it's been in a lot of different markets, so I'm sure it's popped up to some degree. But for those who aren't familiar, just to kind of level set, in Hollywood, most shows, almost every screenplay, every TV show, every sitcom, all the stuff that we consume, whether it's on network television, whether it's in a movie theater, or most commonly now through one of the big streaming platforms like a Netflix or Hulu or you name it. There's a writers group, and they're employed and they're in a union. It's Writers Guild of America. So much like there's the Screen Actors Guild, which is for the actors, and then there's the Directors Guild, which is for the directors. In Hollywood, there's all these labor unions that are part and parcel to creating the incomes for all those who make the entertainment we love to enjoy. And those contracts were up for renewal. So the Writers Guild contract was up for renewal. So as any contract with a labor union, whether it be pro sports or other, comes up, people start to negotiate. Well, that negotiation fell apart. And so a strike.
And when was this? When did the negotiation fall apart? This is all recent.
So 2 weeks ago. So basically on May 2nd is when the strike for the Writers Guild started. Now, so we're about 2 weeks into it as we record this and broadcast this right now. And so that's kind of the backstory, right? So the idea is we need to be paid more because you, the studios, and you, the streamers, are making more. So that's the layman's premise of what's going on now.
Yeah, well, this is the absolute worst time for them to go into a negotiation. Actually, like it's at this stage in time, like right after these large language models have been introduced, for them now to come and say, "Hey, we demand more money," this is not going to end well for them.
Yep.
I don't see it ending well for them at all, because they don't have the power that they've had in previous negotiations. And I don't know that they realize that at first. And they're going to try to fight this, because I bet many of them have not experienced using some of these large language models, using ChatGPT-4. And I mean, it's kind of freaky when you think about it for them. Like, they don't have a good negotiation leg to stand on now. If they had done this before March, they would have had a much better leg to stand on, because ChatGPT-4 had not been released yet, and it was just the early games of this. Now, with all these chatbots and everything else that's coming out, I don't think their negotiation is going to work out well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think from a business perspective, you're seeing already that the margins of most companies are now being squeezed, given what is happening in the world right now. And so you come in with technology, they definitely lose all their bargaining power. So I don't know how they're going to push this. Because if you're going to sell on the basis of creativity, technology is also addressing because of ChatGPT and all of these AI tools, they're going to fulfill that need for most outfits and for most studios.
So I'm going to take the other side of this coin for shits and giggles, and I'm going to argue for why they might have more leverage than it seems. But I'm also going to make the caveat that I don't disagree with you guys in totality. What I'm going to offer up as a counterpoint would be that everything Travis said, especially about the timing, everything that you just added to it, Donald, I think is accurate. And one thing that I would say, Travis, is, knowing several of these folks, having several conversations, even reading several of the pieces that have come out in Hollywood Reporter or others, there's actually a pretty deep understanding of the power of this technology, both as a tool to work with and also as a potential threat to kind of the mission of a labor union, which is to kind of elevate the base floor price that a member of that union, which is contracted to do work for a studio, is supposed to receive, right? So I think there's the obvious thing of, is there an imminent threat? There is an imminent threat that this poses to labor negotiations being good or in the favor of the guild. At the same time, I don't believe, and I think several others would agree, that it's an existential threat, meaning that it ends the business as we know it. And I also don't think this ends anytime soon. And that's an important piece that I think where your guys are going is worth saying. So how do you make sure that, like, what are the things that would cause this to sway the lever of bargaining power in the direction of the Writers Guild, or right behind it is the Directors Guild, which has already started to negotiate before their contractor expires. So let's get into what some of the ammo is that the guilds have that right now may be overplayed by the studios and by the streamers as it relates to leverage, because I think there's actually a really interesting market dynamic that is being overplayed right now if this drags out beyond 6 months. So let's talk about those. What do you think some of those are? What are your kind of comments on where you think this gets stronger or weaker for either side?
Well, I would think that the augmentation of technology is going to make a few of the writers just amazing, right? It's going to be able, because I've experienced that on my own part by working on this Cornetopia project. Is at this point I've pretty much written a full book from my own input and the use of that. I can take each particular chapter, turn it into an episode pretty easily. And then once it's in the format of a script, you can tell it like how long approximately the script is. And then you're able to, I really think that you probably could create these franchises and use less people. But they're still going to need the writers to help facilitate this and to create the content, because let's be honest, a lot of Hollywood recently has not been very, how many Fast and the Furiouses do we fucking need? Like, get a new idea. Like, Fast and the Furious is not even a good show, right? So it's like, that's my thought, is that I think we're going to come up with more creative ideas over time, but I think that probably a lot of them are going to be with much smaller teams. And so maybe the smaller teams will get paid more, but there'll be less of them overall. That's would be the logical conclusion to this, in my mind, is we don't need as many people now, but the people that we keep around longer, sure, you'll get paid more.
And I want to make a comment on that, but Donald, do you have anything to add to that?
In the Philippines, we also have unions. In fact, very strong unions. So the country is very pro labor, which means you can't. We give 13th and 14-month pays. You cannot just fire. I mean, it's so hard to fire someone here, right? And you empower them now with a union. So it's very tough, especially for businesses. So I think in the end, however, the argument is always that it has to be the survival of the business is the most important, and any employee should be able to provide clear value. For me, with technology coming in, that value goes down. So I think the only way for me to address that, if you want me to argue for the writers, is that they have to be the ones who's able to use all of these technologies, use them as an enabler to increase their creativity, to show that they're the ones also at the forefront of using AI, of using ChatGPT and all of these other tools, and then they have something to bargain with. But to bargain on the basis of livelihood, or to bargain on the basis of job security, I think that's a very weak argument, because the businesses right now are also having many challenges.
Yeah, very good point. So Travis, you actually, I love the thinking frameworks, guys, and I like to give people simple frameworks to kind of organize their thinking. So yep. You made a comment, Travis, just a second ago, and Donald just kind of gave us an example of it. And I think you're absolutely right, Donald, on where the bargaining power is and isn't right now, and where the argument should be and where it should move away from. Travis, you said something about more and less, and I want to touch on that for a minute. If I was to put 3 columns together, this plays into a framework that I use and that I learned from a dear friend, Mickey McManus, years ago, about just what happens in an exponentially technology-driven world where we have both organic cognition, i.e. human thinking and capacity, and silicon cognition, i.e. AI and artificial intelligence, things like that. And it's simple, 3 columns: more, less, better, right? So then you start to think about, what is there going to be more of, right? So to your point, there's more streamers, there's more subscriptions today than there was 12 months ago, right? 15, 24 months ago, we had less subscriptions because we had Netflix and Prime and maybe one other, and they gave us all the other stuff, right? And there was all these different licenses that had existed to put Spider-Man, all these things. And then, then Disney Plus came in the mix, and they took all their content back as soon as it was able to, and then they scaled exponentially to a big player in the subscription model. And then what happens is people see that, right? And they go, wait a minute, we've got good content. So Paramount and, Hulu and everybody else starts to do this. So what we have
it took a while for them to shake off the old models, right?
Yeah.
For the longest time, you were thinking, like, when Netflix didn't just sneak up on anybody, but they just weren't paying attention. Right. There's a really great documentary about Netflix and how it sort of took over. But then all of a sudden, all of the studios were like, oh, my God, we better create Hulu. We got to help. And so they were actually giving all of Netflix their content pretty cheap, licensing it. That's why Netflix, I think, is having some hard times now, is because they don't have all that content that's been licensed to them. So they're not the big dog anymore. Now, when you got Paramount Plus and you got Hulu and Disney, and now HBO Max, which is rebranding as Max, which is weird because Cinemax is still a thing and they're losing all their HBO branding. It seems weird, but there's just a lot of stuff that's sort of transpiring in this space. Every channel has its own streaming thing now. So you don't need cable. You just get to pick which ones you want. So definitely technology has impacted this tremendously. Now you're going to see a lot more of these independent companies like Netflix and some of these other ones needing to create great content. So these writers are needed more than ever, but I just think the good ones are needed. As Donald said, the ones that can use the technology.
Yeah, no. So again, you're heading in the same direction. So more, what else is there going to be more of? There's more need for new content. Now, we didn't say whether it was quality or crap or whatever. There's just purely more need. What's driving that? The need for each one of these new platforms, right, that have now fragmented bigger to drive more subscribers. And, oh, by the way, to drive more tiers of subscription so that they can monetize off the subscription, and also the old world legacy media, Web 1 media, weaponized Web 2 media of ads, right? So now Netflix and everybody else has launched plans to have a $7.99 that still has ads in it. But we were never, remember, that was the promise of cable. So nothing's been innovated in that model. And we cut the cord to save money and have better non-ad driven subscription models that worked for a while. But then as it fragmented out over the last couple of years and pre-COVID, right, then what happened was everybody took back their rights to stuff because there wasn't enough new content that was quality. And so to that point, more subscribers also drives more profits in the short run. Okay, now let's go to the less column for a minute. What is there less of? Well, there's probably less of a need from a total team standpoint. To your earlier comment, Travis, I need less people to crank out more content in a faster clip. However, that doesn't mean I need less people in total. Potentially, it could, but it doesn't necessarily. In order to feed this beast.
Well, as AI is getting stronger, we saw that with Corridor Digital. Like, some of this stuff, I don't think we're quite ready, but some of this stuff will be able to be done with AI models and stuff easier, potentially.
True.
But that's later.
True, right. So if we believe, Donald, too, that more platforms are needed, or the current state of more, which is 12 or 15 or 10 different things I can subscribe to if I really want to be, the ultimate consumer of options, right? Then there needs to be more output in a more efficient way. That could mean that there actually are plenty of jobs. They just become outsourced, or they become pods, and AI is helping to augment them so that more can be created. There's also less potential likelihood that, given the macroeconomic conditions globally, of recession, of other things that have nothing to do with content, right? That consumers are going to start cutting bills, right? So as that happens, that's not going to happen overnight, but over the next 6 months, that could mean less spend on these platforms, which starts a different kind of cascading event to the profits of these streamers and the other things, without changing anything related to our demand for more than just formulaic crap, as Travis mentioned earlier with Fast and Furious 29. So what do you think goes in the less column? And then we'll talk about better, because I think that's where people could start to focus if they're on either side of this. What does better look like? How do I implement better? How could, if I'm the Writers Guild, how could we create processes that defend our workforce, but make us better at deploying these things than anybody else, so that we actually bring value to the business cycle, while at the same time creating new ways for life. So let's talk about less a little bit more. What else goes into less in your guys' minds? Donald, you got anything?
Well, no, for me, bottom line, the Writers Guild cannot argue on on the basis of the rules of the past. It has to be on the rules of the future. It has to be what makes sense for the studios, for the content companies, right? I agree that you're saying that, during COVID, I think content consumption just doubled because everyone was at home, or tripled, right? But right now, you're looking at the reality where people are now going back to work. So content consumption is going down a bit. We're seeing, at the same time, we're seeing the global recession. The disposable income is not going up. It will be going down. So they will be allocating lesser budgets to put into consuming media. Maybe the content team would have to be posting content on YouTube or other free forms rather than on subscription forms, or they just have to be very creative. In the Philippines, TikTok just became number one. It just surpassed everyone, right? I know TikTok is not allowed there, or it's a question mark there, but everyone is consuming TikTok. So Netflix and all other streaming platforms are hitting a ceiling. They're not growing anymore, right? So because of the free, and everyone is becoming a content creator. What we're seeing is that depends on the person who wants to consume content, rather than watching content that is created by a studio. They prefer watching content from the consumers themselves, right? So especially in the Asian setting, everything is very social. They're creating content on their own, and then watching vlogs more than they're watching the shows coming from the biggest networks here. So I'm saying that the bargaining power is not with the creative groups right now, with the creative guilds right now.
I would say, I would add on that less. There are less consumers potentially wanting to consume this content, as Donald just mentioned. And think of it like this, what happened when Joe Rogan, he's an independent creator, and he's getting 200-300 million views every month. That's like 3 Super Bowls a month he's getting viewed on. It's just unbelievable. And then we saw Tucker Carlson recently on CB. He got booted off of Fox, and then he went on Twitter. He's going to launch his own Twitter show. That thing got like 50 million views or something stupid, 80 million views. It depends on what they're tracking as a view, but one of them says like 35 million views. The other says 80 million people saw the tweet or whatever. Like, that just blows it away when you consider people would sit there. 2 million people is a big audience, and now these audiences are getting, so many millions of people tuning in. I think that's exactly right. Is now we're at a space where traditional content carries less gravitas with the consumer, and those influencers have taken over. But now we're at a point where a lot of these influencers are having to up their game, because there's more influencers than ever creating content. I mean, hell, look at us right now. We're creating content right now. And if we're lucky enough, whoever's behind you're watching this. And so thank you. We're creating content for you. We're talking about ideas. Now there's so many people out there who are talking about ideas now at this point that, I don't see it's almost like you're not going to have exponential growth. And that's one of the problems with our civilization is, exponential growth. Well, there's not exponential people. There's not exponential growth. You're going to get the limited returns eventually. You got a big boost. COVID changed the game a bit. It made it weird. Now everybody assumes that's the way that it is. Well, sorry, Writers Guild. That's the way it was back in 2020, 2021. They did make a lot of money. Your deal was not in place for you to make a lot of money then. And now you're trying to ask for a lot of money when they're all being squeezed. And now they're all being squeezed. And there's need for good content, but there's all these great influencers that are creating content. And so the attention is fragmented at this point.
Well, I think a couple things there to clarify. They're not arguing for a lot of money. They're arguing for a better shake of the money being generated. And I'm
right.
just clarifying.
If it's a percentage deal, then that makes sense. I don't know the full-on nuances of what it is.
Yeah, we don't have time to get into it in the long thread, but I want to clarify that because that's not necessarily a true statement. It wasn't intended to be misleading, and I know that. I just want to clarify that this isn't about arguing for a lot of money. This is about arguing for, in their case, a living wage. To Donald's point earlier and to yours, you can't argue on the basis of how things worked in the past. And at the same time, this is an important dialogue to have around how, and I'm not saying it can do it alone, how Web3 incentive models and those kind of things where the users and the creators on the edge are getting a more merit-driven, equitable share of the art and content and things that they create versus a platform-centric world that keeps all of the rewards and then is rewarded for it and shareholders back it because that's the growth model that we've been in. This is not the end of capitalism in the sense of trading it for something else, but it is the end of purely shareholder value driven capitalistic incentive models if we want to solve any of these problems for people when it comes to the mass amount of society, because this is not the only industry, as we all know, that will be impacted dramatically by the efficiencies that these technologies create. One of the things you guys said that I want to touch on with the less was, yes, less income, more time spent working to make up the difference while prices go. And so that means less time to consume the content that I'm already over inundated with. So again, these things kind of play in. Now, where does that lead? I don't know, but what I would say the argument is we went through a cycle where reality TV, which started in like the early 90s with Real World, the Real World, unscripted show. We went through this run where that was novel and that was new and it was efficient. And then we got into kind of the big bull run of the last 15 years of essentially unscripted TVs, Kardashians, everything else. But at the end of the day, even Joe Rogan, there's writers involved in Tucker Carlson, whether he's on Fox or whether he's on Twitter. He ain't writing that stuff himself, right? So can he use AI? Will he be using it? Absolutely he is and probably will be. So will Rogan. But these are anomalies too. They were built as brands during the platform era. It's no different than books. Like you couldn't get a book deal in the early 00s that paid you at a big advance because you didn't have a big following. So you had to have a platform in advance to still get the writer's advance that you wanted, or you had to have a new emerging platform on social because that was the new mechanism to get an advance.
Well, even the book you and I wrote, Snook, even the book you and I wrote, like 95% or something like that went to Wiley. And then you and I split 5% or something. It's just tiny. And it's like, that's the business model, really, is that the writers always are getting screwed. And now are getting into the place now where, for example, I'm going to bring up Corridor Digital again. I covered it really early on one of our first shows where they were, reimagining animation. And they took a whole, they basically with like 6 or 7 people were able to do what would normally take about 50 to 100 people to do. So it's like, do you still hire all 50 or 100 people, even though you can do it more effectively or efficiently? Or are we churning out content quicker? So then so that's maybe the deal, is having AI help you create content and augment things quicker. So that way you can generate more. And then it's almost like, I think we're entering the age of the creative director. So if you're the ones who's creating it and leading it, then that you have lots of value. If you're just the regular writer guy who just adds in a quip every once in a while, that you're not gonna win.
Yeah. Donald, I'm going to turn it to you because I could go on to that one, but I want to.
I think bottom line, we're all arguing on the basis now of what is the real value of creativity. I used to be advertising agency side. One
Yeah.
creative person can charge $1,000 per output. One can be $10,000. But if you think about it, they might look the same. But one may have more because it came from, for example, a creative director who has more awards than
Right.
someone who didn't have who just didn't go to an award show and didn't submit his work. Right. And that's, I think, the point. It's not a piece of product that you can sell. Creativity or the script or anything that output is so subjective.
It's
Mm.
it's
Right.
actually one of my favorite points that any one of us has made right now, Donald. That was a freaking brilliant little quip there. What is the value of creativity? That is the question that is really at the heart of this whole discussion when it comes to this specific use case in this business. And that's the thing that has to be answered. And that's also the thing, if you're negotiating on either side right now, that you have to have some foresight. You kind of have to go down the road of ways, because that value today is not what it'll be in 6 months and not what it'll be in 5 years. And it might take time, right? We have lived with garbage television,
Yep.
right? For the better part of 15 years with
Dude, garbage television,
news.
garbage movies, that's all recycled crap. Like, how many Scooby-Doos do we need?
Well, and I'm not talking about even like good IPs, maybe like Scooby-Doo. We're reinventing those because we haven't come up with something new, because it was too easy to do unscripted shit and just have a bunch of people go crazy as whatever polarizing demographic they represented, and they could run themselves off a wall. And whether it was the kid, the women with 9 kids and they had their run and then they get divorced, or whether it's the the influencers that train wreck out, or whether it's the people that live in the freaking swamps and do what it's like. We've got garbage television that's escapism. And
how many housewives do we need to know about, and how many different cities do we have to have them?
And the reality is why is it still being done? Because there's an economic math equation that's profitable. That's why it's being done. But what happens?
That's it right there.
But what happens? What happens when a creator, and I'll use you because we know what you're doing right now, when a creator and a writer and a visionary has tools where they can more efficiently put something quality together and take it out to market? Well, maybe what happens is the bar gets raised again and we start craving more of that. Like, we've all seen shows with great writing. We've all seen shows on Netflix that we've watched with great writing, whether it's The Diplomat, whether it's, Breaking Bad way back in the day. Like, there are shows that just have great, and you go, man, that was well written. That's valuing creativity in a different level. But we needed to get to a point where it's economical enough where that becomes the norm. Right? It became super economical to do user-generated stuff, to do influence-generated stuff. And so we've got this mass wall of noise around it now, right? And it's more and more expensive to stand out. Something will similarly happen as we get too formulaic. We'll homogenize stuff with AI, and it'll create a new baseline of what's quality for sure. And that'll exceed anything we had before without it. But then I still believe the value of creativity will emerge even more so. The question is, how long does that take? And how do we bridge the gap between those in that line of work now and those in that line of work when it's valued at a different rate? And that's the question that has to be answered.
And I want to touch bases, like what you might say as from the framework of being better is it's almost like, they could be a little more nimble, a little smaller, but it's almost like you give me a creative director and a great writer and AI, and then give me some time to come up with some ideas. We're going to come up with a bunch of great ideas that could potentially be television shows, especially if you know which prompts to use to ask, like, what have been the most successful TV shows of all time? What have got the most viewers? What do those things have in common? Oh, let's apply this to this idea. Boom. And then here we go. Let's write that. And so I think that to make it better is it's like if you're a creative person, you need to get with a writer and then get with ChatGPT 4 and then get to work. Because if you come up with your own sort of idea that you're augmenting on, that you own the IP of, well, guess what? You're going to get paid a lot more in the long run than if you're just a writer in somebody else's sort of wagon, you just jumping on and helping them out with some words every once in a while. That's not going to be needed as much in the future. What's needed is great ideas, and what's needed is creative, this revolution that's happening. Because I tell you, I've never felt more creative in my life. I've created over 7,000 images on Midjourney. I've prompted over 6,000 times. I don't even know how many times on ChatGPT-4 because it doesn't tell you how many times. But I know I'm always reaching the limits of what I can do because I got to wait an hour until I can use it again. And people, it's like the thing is that anyone who is really sculpting an idea or piecing it together, AI does not have memory yet. So there is some challenges on this, on how you're able to construct long form ideas or worlds or fantasy worlds, but it can be done. I think in the future, once AI has memory, once you're able to easily input ChatGPT-4 into a memory bank, Pinecone.io has some capabilities, but it's not good yet. It's not user friendly. Then that's when the shows could become really creative because you can program it and then pull off of itself. You can't do that yet, but we're very close to this. And so this is going to be interesting to keep an eye on this long term, Chris, as people are trying to figure out what is the value of creativity as we're entering this realm where everybody is more creative than ever.
Yeah, everyone is creative. And because right now there's no excuse not to be a technology expert also. So now if the creative just always feel that no, the tech part, the techies are the techies, we're the creative people, right? But now we're seeing the merger of that. I mean, you Travis,
yes.
you're an embodiment of that. You
Well,
merge the technology know-how and the creativity.
I really feel like creative technologist really is what it is. That's a new thing. I think it's that more and more people are going to move into that space. I think. Thank you for that. That's good.
Yeah, and Donald, I'm going to finish with this as we wrap this up. A couple of weeks back, you had talked about how large language models that, we currently have heard about at nauseum and talked about, are very US centric right now. Now there's other ones being developed in other parts of the world, but as we think about, more, less, and better, this also becomes a very strategic opportunity and a potential real catalyst for the democratization of quality, of better, coming out of more cultures without it being some political mandate, right, or diversified mandate. Because as people start to look for better, and as they start to get access to these tools in more affordable ways, writers, not just from America, not just from the Western side, but writers can now do more with less, just as Travis is talking about, which means the human side of us is what we resonate with when we fall in love with content, whether it be art, music, or whatever. It's the human story, right? It's that thing that we can't explain to others or ourselves, but we can all feel. And so this comes from cultural relevance. And I think what these tools and what the market may see is and what will help the streamers, but also potentially create opportunities, again, for the guilds to figure out processes that can be exported to other markets and other languages or whatever, is this proliferation of human relevant creative writing and content at scale that can be serving a multitude of niches that now exist that used to not be served, right? And that's what's interesting. So as my friend Mickey would say, more is inevitable, less is a reality, and the money is in the better. So what is the value of creativity?
Be better. Be better.
Be better. Thanks, guys.
That's it. That's my new mantra. That's my new mantra. Be better.
Be better.
Just do better. Do better. Be better. You can do it.
Thanks
Thanks for tuning in. Be better.